brucellosis, which is a zoonotic disease of animals, and all of the fun things it can do to humans. It can cause your testicles to swell. That's another thing. If you notice something weird about your body and you're not sure what's going on, definitely go see a doctor. Brucellosis is a disease that usually manifests in animals. Specifically, we always think about brucellosis and dairy cattle because cows typically, at least in America and other parts of the world, are kept in very close quarters, and because of this they tend to get this disease pretty often, and it can be super detrimental to like the cattle and dairy industry. And also the most common way that humans get brucellosis is by consuming unpasteurized milk and other dairy products or infected meat. And also, if you're like working directly as a veterinarian with animals infected with Brucella, you are at a high risk or higher risk of getting brucellosis. If you're working in a lab with the bacteria, it can be passed in either an airborne way or through like direct contact or through ingestion. And brucellosis is one of the most common zoonotic diseases in the world, with over 500,000 new cases in humans every year. So that's quite a lot of people. It's not rare. So over here, I have like this is an artificial like or basically this is kind of an artistic image. This is not really what Brucella look like, but they are indeed these sort of short rod shaped bacteria. All right, so what do infected animals look like? One of the first things you probably want to know if you are around animals that might have brucellosis is, what do they look like? Well, typically it's really hard to tell is the first thing. So basically any animal could be infected with brucellosis, and like such as elk. So if you're a hunter and you didn't like are going out and hunting like boar, elk, bison, there have been very recent cases kind of where a whole bunch of these animals in certain regions of the US like Yellowstone have come down with brucellosis. So first of all, when I typed in pictures of infected animals, for whatever reason, this picture of this guy basically throwing these goats popped up for brucellosis. I do not know what it means. The article that was written about this had nothing to do with throwing goats. Basically, the article is about this recent brucellosis outbreak in lab workers, where it wasn't even involving animals directly. So they were at a veterinary research center in China, and this happened back in 2019 in December, where some of the research students started showing signs of brucellosis. They had to close the labs. They had some mice that tested positive, so even mice can get it. And then let's see what else happened. Okay. Well, anyways, this is just one of the many cases. We'll go over some more, but anyways, that was one example. And then, so some of the other ways that you can tell if an animal has brucellosis is if let's say it's a cow, it's spontaneously aborting its calf. So that's really sad. But down here in this lower image, this is basically an aborted calf fetus. It's very sad. And also, you might also see these little piles of basically the reproductive parts from a cow that has had a miscarriage or an abortion, a spontaneous abortion, because of the disease. And then one of the other ways that people can diagnose animals with brucellosis is through inflammation in the nether regions. This is called orchitis. And yes, I had to censor this image because it was quite large. So for cows, bovine brucellosis is caused by Brucella abortus, because of how many cow abortions happen when the cows are infected with the bacteria. Mice, it's always rats that get the fun stuff? No. I mean, I'm pretty sure like rats could also be infected with Brucella. Anyways, cows that are pregnant are more susceptible to the disease. However, when the cow aborts the calf, obviously the infection is self-limiting. The female mother cow will still have some of the bacteria, in her like reproductive tracts. However, at this point in this stage, the cow has kind of gained immunity because it has kind of gone through the first infection and now has an immune response to the bacteria. So actually one of the most common ways that farmers and other cattle people across America and other countries deal with this pandemic, or I shouldn't even say pandemic, my bad, to keep it from becoming a pandemic, is they vaccinate their cows against Brucella. There was some question about whether or not brucellosis forms any kind of like lesion. Usually there's no like lesions on the skin of the animal. What usually happens is there's swelling in the cow's mammary gland, or even other like animals as well. We're going to just use cows as our kind of main example here. So there will be swelling in the mammary gland because the mammary glands tend to be selectively infected more by this bacteria. This is why unpasteurized milk is at a much higher risk to have the bacteria in it, because when you're milking the cow, a lot of that milk will have active bacteria in it. And then also it's thought that the mammary gland has a lot of these host macrophages, which are these cool little immune cells that usually will go and eat any kind of bacteria. And so the macrophages do ingest Brucella. However, the Brucella have this defense mechanism where they can actually live inside of the macrophages, and we'll get to that, and they survive inside of them and can basically start replicating, and then they cause the macrophage to die at a specific point, releasing all of these Brucella bacteria into like the tissue, and that's how the infection persists. And they're very hardy little bacteria. So yes, bull testicles are commonly infected, and atrophy of the testicle may occur. So this is kind of gross, and I have refrained from showing pictures of an atrophied testicle with severe tissue necrosis. It does not look good, does not look fun. I don't think anyone would want that. And then also there could be like this discharge, which I mentioned, which is also kind of disgusting. There was a lot of zoomed in pictures of this stuff, and I decided not to put it on here because I didn't want to freak you guys out. Then there's also swine brucellosis, which is caused by Brucella suis, and this also causes abortion, birth of weak piglets, infertility, more orchitis, this lovely inflammation, epididymis, which is inflammation of the coiled tube called the epididymis at the back of the testicle. I did not know what that was. I had to Google it. So that can happen in animals as well. Actually, the scary thing is that in certain cases, humans can also undergo these same symptoms, which is not fun. Man, I'm glad I don't have testicles. Okay, so moving on. What are the symptoms in humans? So we've seen the symptoms in animals. So what does this infection look like in humans? So the first initial symptoms are very vague. It's just fever, sweats, anorexia, headache, fatigue. Looks like the flu. Long term, you can have recurrent fevers, arthritis, organ swelling, neurologic symptoms, chronic fatigue, and then in certain cases, there can be some severe reactions to the bacteria. So let's say initially the patient is treated with usually a very strict regimen of antibiotics, but for whatever reason, they stop taking the antibiotics. They don't finish all of them because they don't have any more symptoms. However, the bacteria, they're still there. So the bacteria come back, and in that case, the bacteria may have entered vital organs such as the heart and the liver. And this can cause something called Brucella endocarditis. And there was a case report that I was reading about an 8-year-old girl who presented to the emergency room with fever, body pain, skin rash. She had previously come in, and so this picture here is kind of the rash that she had spreading all over her arms and legs. It does not look super great. And she had come before and had been diagnosed with brucellosis and was given antibiotics. And she took the antibiotics, which included like rifampin, which is one of the pretty common broad spectrum antibiotics that you can take for this disease. And her symptoms went away. However, 2 weeks after she stopped taking antibiotics, the symptoms returned and she developed these rashes. And the rashes, they're called leukocytoclastic vasculitis, which is basically the little capillaries in the skin are inflamed, and that's why you're seeing these patches of red. So she had these rashes. And also it turned out that initially, like prior to getting brucellosis, she had a history of heart problems. She had had a pulmonary valve replacement. And so it was because of this, it was more likely that the bacteria were able to go to her heart and start proliferating there. And she had been drinking unpasteurized milk. So they treated her again with various types of antibiotics, and she did recover after 9 months, but it was pretty severe. Rifampin? Say what fast? Oh, let me, okay, leukocytoclastic vasculitis. It's a mouthful. It is a mouthful. Styles, you grew up on a farm, very Trojan horse of brucellosis. Styles, did you ever encounter Brucella on your time at the farm? All right, so moving along. There can also be skeletal complications where people present with arthritis, and this is because the bacteria are causing inflammation around the joints. Actually, sometimes they can even live in like the bone marrow, which is very scary. And then, of course, there are some cases, and I'll show you the paper, talking about inflammation of the testes that can occasionally happen. Hang on, which tab was it? Oh yes. Okay, I don't know if you guys can see this paper. How is it showing up for you? All right, there we go. Okay, so this is a study. So also I should quickly say that while brucellosis isn't a problem here in America, it is endemic in places like the Mediterranean basin, South and Central America, Eastern Europe, Asia, Africa, the Caribbean, and the Middle East. And there was a study done where they were looking at the frequency of epididymorchitis. I cannot say this word. And it turned out that 12% of the 134 male patients with brucellosis had this complication, which again is swelling of the epididymis, which is that tube that does things. And so there was abscesses. Apparently they were testing to see if like fertility was reduced. And fortunately, the good news is that they were able to treat all of these patients, and relapse occurred on only one. And so it is a treatable disease. It's not necessarily life-threatening unless you do not properly get treated. However, and also they were saying that there is a risk of infertility if you are infected with this bacteria. So that, if you're interested in the paper, I have put all the sources at the end of my PowerPoint that you can look at. It's a lot to go through, so I'm not going to really go through it right now. But yeah, your cows were kept far from regular areas. The ranchers kept all their animals protected. That's good. That's good. That definitely reduces the risk of contracting this disease. Cows kill more people a year than sharks. Wait, are we talking about cows killing people directly or indirectly killing? That is insane. I actually don't know off the top of my head how many shark attacks happen annually, so I don't know if it's a small number. Straight out directly, how is brucellosis transmitted? So I did mention it's through contact or consumption of infected animals. Human-to-human transmission is pretty rare. And just to kind of give you guys a number, there were 165 human cases of brucellosis in 2019, according to the CDC. The incubation time before you see symptoms is usually like 2 to 3 weeks. So by that point, because brucellosis or Brucella are very slow growing bacteria. And so you might have had contact with, you might have drunk unpasteurized milk like 3 weeks prior, and then you'll get symptoms later because they are very slow growing. So sometimes, that can complicate treatment too. Because you might not remember what you did 2 or 3 weeks ago, so it's harder to tell the doctors like the specific scenarios, because then the doctors have to take like a sample, and then because it's so slow growing, they have to wait before they can properly diagnose what kind of infection you have. And that's, time is always one of the biggest enemies in treating bacterial infections. However, because it's slow growing too, treatment is a little easier, which is nice. Okay. And then how do animals get brucellosis? So usually brucellosis is, its host is within an animal, and it's just transmitted constantly from one animal host to the other. And this is through direct contact, or if there's bacteria in the environment, like the dirt, that can be picked up from by other animals, and then they'll get infected as well. So how does Brucella evade the immune system? So first of all, here are some of the specific strains. So Brucella melitensis, which I believe melitensis is usually the species that's found infecting humans. And then Brucella abortus, which is typically the pathogenic strain found in cattle. There's some other strains like RB51. I don't remember the specifics of this, but I know it infects humans. Brucella canis, your dog can get brucellosis. It's very scary. And then Brucella seti and Pinnipediae. These were actually isolated from marine animals. So even in the ocean, there's Brucella. So basically, when Brucella, Brucella has kind of evolved these host-specific mechanisms to hide from and manipulate our immune system, and they will typically wait. So basically, they can be sort of dormant in the host and wait for like the opportunity to infect the host when they're at a low point in their immune system. For example, females during pregnancy when their natural immunity is lower. And this allows the Brucella to kind of establish a persistent infection within their host so that they don't die out. So Brucella expresses this kind of like, it has like a little shell that made out of lipopolysaccharide that is detected by your receptors on your immune cells, and this leads to the Brucella being taken up by like the macrophages. It's also taken up by dendritic cells and neutrophils, which are 3 different cell types that make up your innate immune system. So when I say innate, I mean like the immune system that directly, like immediately responds to any kind of bacteria or virus. It doesn't need to be activated through like this whole cascade of cellular signaling that the adaptive, like your T cells and B cells need. So anyways, these phagocytic cells, they'll eat the Brucella bacteria, but what usually happens is the bacteria, they're in the like little phagolysosome inside of the immune cell, but they don't die. And they actually can sort of, so let's see here. They don't usually die. So there is a caveat. When macrophages take up Brucella, about 90% of the bacteria that they take up are indeed killed within the first 4 hours. But there are the surviving 10% that are kind of in their own special little like vesicle, which is like a little sac within a cell, and they avoid being killed. And then they fuse with this part of the cell called the endoplasmic reticulum, which you guys don't really need to know. Probably from like high school biology, you might have heard of the ER. But basically, the bacteria fuses onto the ER, and this triggers the cell's stress response called the unfolded protein response to kind of kick in. And this tells the cell, like, hey, there's something seriously wrong here, which then triggers a bunch of like different genes to do various things. And what this leads to is eventually apoptosis, so cell killing. So eventually the macrophage will kill itself. However, the Brucella bacterium will actually keep the macrophage alive long enough so that it can replicate in the endoplasmic reticulum. And then when the macrophage dies, it just explodes Brucella out into the extracellular space, and it infects new cells. Okay. So yes, anyways, the Brucella, they break out of the macrophages and they go infect more cells. So in the picture that I have on the slide here, so in this red kind of cell-shaped image, this is a macrophage that's not infected. And then on the right side, we see all these little bright green dots. That is Brucella that has been labeled with something called GFP, which is this fluorescent protein, and it shows up bright green. And so you can easily see that this macrophage is just chock full of bacteria. The other interesting thing to notice here is that the macrophage, instead of being nicely spread out, usually macrophages they're like spread out because that's their normal cell shape. This one's all bunched up and has a bunch of holes in it, so it's not looking too great. And so this is kind of a macrophage undergoing this unfolded protein response thing that I mentioned earlier. And then over here on the right, we have some immunohistochemistry stains of tissue. So this is like tiny slices of tissue from, and I believe this one was from, where was this one from? I thought I had, hang on, I think it was this paper. No, was it not this paper? Was it this paper? Okay, it was a paper that I have somewhere. All I know, so it was a type of reproductive tissue from canines that were infected with Brucella. And the point of the paper was to kind of show, where does Brucella go in an infected animal? Like, what tissue does it like to hang out? Because that will obviously help with deciding how to treat the animal. So here, this was like the lining. So kind of like the inside of your organs, there's like other kind of skin layers, kind of like your skin on the outside, but there's like skin on the inside too. And inside, there are these cells that you can see the little red dots. That's all of the Brucella. And then down below, you have these kind of bigger cells that are kind of like spindle shaped, and those are macrophages. And those ones are full of the little red dots, which is the Brucella. So that's kind of showing that macrophages are one of the main hosts for the Brucella bacterium inside of the body. The neutrophils, they'll change the intracellular portion of the neutrophil to be kind of more like acidic, and it'll have a lot of enzymes that are supposed to break down bacteria cells. But the Brucella, they survive, which is insane. Okay. Also, the other interesting thing, Brucella like to live in the placental trophoblasts. So trophoblasts are these very specific types of cells that are kind of a layer of tissue on the outside of the mammalian blastula. So this is all about the developing embryo. So inside of the pregnant like cow or whatever, there's the blastula, and then inside there's like the embryo developing and all of that fun stuff. And the Brucella like to specifically live in those cells that are in that environment. And this is probably, because they're in that region, I don't know exactly the exact mechanism that they do to cause the spontaneous abortions that happen in a lot of the cows that are infected with this, but it is probably because there's a huge viral or bacterial load down there. And yes, anyhow, let's see here. Right, and then if you guys remember from our talk about anthrax, bacteria will usually have special genes in their genome that encode for these certain toxins, and the genome is called, or the little gene segment is called a pathogenicity island. And for Brucella, it has specific genes that encode for proteins that allow them to enter into the macrophages and survive inside of the macrophages and other cells as well. So finally, how do you diagnose Brucella? So it's gram-negative. So instead of staining purple with the gram stain, and if you guys remember, anthrax is gram-positive, so that was a nice bright purple rod. Brucella is not. It'll be a pink. It's non-motile, so it has no flagella. It doesn't form a spore or a capsule. So remember, anthrax is a spore former and it has a capsule, so it's very hardy in the environment. Brucella is not so hardy in the environment. And then Brucella is facultative intracellular, so that means that it can live inside and outside of the host cells, and it doesn't lyse blood. So when you're culturing it, you can, it's funny, you can basically take some blood from like an infected person, because it will go through and use maybe iron and other compounds from like blood So you can like take blood from a patient to use that as part of your test. You can look for antibodies in the blood of a patient against Brucella. So basically antibodies are produced by your B cells. So yes, I guess this would answer your question. If you wanted to know if you can make immunity against Brucella, you definitely can. Because you have a specific clone of B cells that are recognizing a specific part of Brucella and then producing antibodies against that specific part. And what the antibodies, basically, when they bind to the little microbe, they have these little like ends of the antibody called the constant region that then can bind to like specific receptors on immune cells, which then allows the immune cells to kind of phagocytose and eat the microbe. Again, however, even though they're phagocytosed, they can still persist within those immune cells. So the best way to treat Brucella is with antibiotics that directly like disrupt the bacteria's like cell wall and its other functions. So fun little thing I found when I was looking for what it looks like when you culture Brucella on like a blood agar plate. Somebody made a rug. You can buy a rug of Brucella colonies on the internet. It's actually out of stock and it's $70. I don't know why you would buy a circular shaped rug with colonies on it. I think the website, do I still have the website up here? Yeah, look at this. Go to Fine Art America and you could buy your very own Brucella rug that you could lay out on the sandy beach. You could tan yourself on a bed of Brucella. I don't know. It seemed pretty interesting to me. It looks really fake, to be honest. Apparently it's nice, cozy fabric. Okay, that's cool. I don't know what I'm clicking on. Okay, I'm like giving this rug a lot of shit, but I would probably buy something like this. I'm that kind of person. So the market is for me. Woohoo. So there's a variety of tests that people use to look for Brucella. You can use a PCR test basically to amplify specific known regions that of DNA that are only found in Brucella. You can also use a lateral flow immunoassay. So similar to like a COVID test, you put your sample on this little pad, and then there's like this antibody that will bind to specific parts of the Brucella protein that only Brucella has, which is then also bound to like a colored like enzyme or some kind of dye. And then if you're positive, basically I should say that the antibody is going to be kind of in the test zone strip. So like that strip that turns, like maybe it becomes red if you're positive. That's a very specific strip of antibodies that will only recognize, whatever pathogen or toxin you're looking for. And then the control membrane, that's where all of kind of like your sample that has bound to like the different colored reagent will go, if it isn't caught in the test zone. That was probably a horrible explanation of that. But anyhow, and then let's just move along here. So how to treat Brucella, there's a variety of antibiotics, doxycycline, amoxicillin even. Typically, the CDC recommends a combination of doxycycline and rifampin, but people have also found ciprofloxacin and streptomycin sulfate to work even a little bit better than the combination of dox and rifampin. And usually you have to be on antibiotics for 6 to 8 weeks, which is a really long time. That's basically 2 months. And so you could see, like, when people don't finish their round of antibiotics, maybe because it's just such a long treatment period, they can be at a greater risk of, that's why there's like kind of there's more cases of complications with brucellosis because people have not finished their round of antibiotics. So if you're given antibiotics by your doctor, you should finish the round even if you feel okay. Because basically what has happened is over the course of treatment, the antibiotics will start controlling the entire population of bacteria in your body to a point where they won't cause like actual symptoms, but they're still there. And to entirely eradicate them, you do need to keep going even if you don't feel sick. So what about Brucella and brucellosis in the news? So if you guys are watching Yellowstone, which is like this show on the internet somewhere, apparently brucellosis was brought up, and somebody from my chat last week mentioned it for basically, I think I haven't watched the show, but I'm guessing they had a cattle ranch and their cattle got infected with brucellosis. At that point, you do have to like get rid of all of the animals. You have to clean everything. It's horrible. Also elk in Yellowstone. So this was back in 2017, where elk were being found to be infected with Brucella. And so there they had to go in and get rid of the infected animals before they spread it to other animals. And then apparently in New Zealand, there's cases of sheep breeders trying to mislead ram buyers by saying that their sheep or rams or whatever don't have Brucella, but they apparently do. So people are selling sick animals, which is horrible. Over here, so apparently people are trying to create policies where the government will subsidize loss of cattle if there's a huge outbreak of Brucella. And then in Minnesota, this was kind of fun. In 2021, there was a very small brucellosis outbreak associated with some type of soft cheese that was imported from Mexico into Twin Cities. And it was very few. I think there was only like 4 people who got sick. So it was pretty contained. But apparently this cheese was probably not pasteurized and was had a bunch of Brucella in it. And then there was another brucellosis outbreak in China. And this one happened in 2020, and actually 3,245 people in the Gansu province in northwest China contracted Brucella. And then another 1,400 people were tested positive with some type of rapid test. So they needed to do more testing to make sure it was actually Brucella. So a lot of people. So basically this started at a biological pharmaceutical factory in China where, according to the city's health commission, the factory used expired disinfectants and sanitizers while producing Brucella vaccines for animal use. So always look at your expiration label, because disinfectants can go bad. I actually don't I don't check my expiration labels always, and now I think I will after this story because this is super scary. So basically the bacteria were not completely eliminated, and there was apparently they're supposed to be eliminated in some type of waste gas. So I don't exactly know how they disinfect this gas, but the gas was blown out into the environment, and it contained aerosolized bacteria, and that's why so many people became infected because this bacteria is highly infectious in the airborne form as well. And so that was pretty terrible. There's other cases where people talk about different types of outbreaks linked to raw milk, etc. Some veterinary services director almost losing their job because of some Brucella outbreak. So this bacteria, while very small, has huge impacts all over the world, and it's just something that you should be aware of if you're consuming unpasteurized milk products. Just be careful, make sure you know where that milk is coming from. So, just be smart when you're buying your food products. And if you are around animals and they appear weak, or they're even if you have a pet or something and it gives birth to a litter and they're all dead or something, that's kind of a warning sign. It could be other types of pathogens, but it could also be Brucella. So just, be aware. And yeah, for anyone who wants sources, I will be sharing my slides like a good instructor should. So, and I sadly didn't organize all of these slides or sources. So, yeah, it's a little bit, you can click on them and read it if you want, but that is that. So, anywho, that's all I have about Brucella.